Mr. Ritter.
Good morning, Chair. Today the inquiry will hear from Jill Archibald, an expert witness, and she will deal with observation and engagement and the use of vision-based monitoring. There may be aspects of today's evidence that are difficult to listen to. For some people, it may not be possible to sit through the full session, and we'll be hearing from Ms. Archibald both in the morning and the afternoon. Anyone in the inquiry room should feel free to leave at any time. May I take the opportunity to remind those engaging with the inquiry that emotional support is available for all who require it. Present today, as on every day, are representatives of Hestia, and they are able to provide emotional support. They are currently in this room and can be identified by their orange-coloured scarves. There's a private room downstairs where anyone who needs emotional support can talk to Hestia. If you prefer, you could speak to a member of the inquiry team. We're identifiable by our purple lanyards, and we can put you in touch with Hestia. For those following the hearing online, information about emotional support that's available can be found on the inquiry's website at lampardinquiry.org.uk. The support tab is near the top right-hand corner. Chair, we want everyone engaging with this inquiry in whatever way to feel safe and supported. Chair, with your permission, I'll now ask for Ms. Archibald to be sworn.
I, Jill Archibald, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Would you provide your full name, please?
Yes, Jill Veronica Archibald.
Ms. Archibald, have you provided the inquiry with an expert report called Report for the Lampard Inquiry, Observation and Engagement and the Use of Vision-Based Monitoring?
Yes.
Do you have it in front of you?
I do.
Is it dated the 1st of July 2026?
It is.
And in total, is it 104 pages long?
It is.
Are there a couple of corrections that you'd like to bring to the Chair's attention?
There is.
Can we start with page 92, please, and paragraph 25.16? Should that paragraph simply be deleted because it repeats most of the paragraph above it?
Yeah, it should.
Could we go to page 101, please, and the last paragraph there? Can we see at the end of the first sentence the word note?
Yes.
Should that actually be not?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And then can we look at your appendix at page 102?
Yeah.
Do we see the penultimate paragraph there, starting with number 3, date September 2021 to November 2023? Should that simply be deleted as it repeats the paragraph above it?
Yes, that's correct.
And finally, in the same appendix at the top of the next page, where we see 5, date, can we see there a reference to July 2026? And should that in fact be July 2016?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. If we look at the bottom of page 101, does the report include your confirmation that you've made clear where facts and matters referred to are or are not within your own knowledge, and that where they are within your own knowledge, you confirm them to be true? And finally, that the opinions you've expressed represent your true and complete professional opinions on the matters to which they refer. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you again confirm that today?
I do.
You say at paragraph 1.11, so that's at page 5, that in preparing this report, I have sought to provide objective, balanced and impartial evidence to assist the inquiry on the matters within my area of expertise. Again, is that correct?
That's correct.
Have you signed the report?
I have.
And subject to the corrections that you've just notified, is it true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
Ms Archibald, the report stands as part of your evidence. The Chair, the inquiry and others have read it with care. And that means I don't intend today to ask you about every aspect of it. What I'd like to do now, please, is to ask you a little bit about your own background and experience. Is that okay?
Yes.
You've provided a summary at section 1 of the report, so that's from page 3, and we've seen the appendix, and there's more information there as well, isn't there? Are you a registered mental health nurse, or RMN?
I am.
When did you qualify as an RMN?
2006.
Can you help us with this? What is an RMN?
An RMN is the terminology for a registered mental health nurse.
And what does that entail?
A mental health nurse specialises in supporting people with mental illness, which involves assessing, treating, enabling recovery, and it's a highly skilled role that helps develop a therapeutic relationship and providing holistic care.
Thank you. And does the registered element of it demonstrate that the nurse has completed an approved programme of education in mental health nursing and is registered with the Nursing and Midwifery Council?
Yeah, the registration allows you to practice as a mental health nurse.
Since November 2023, have you been employed as a consultant nurse and responsible clinician stroke approved clinician on a male acute ward in Cumbria within the Cumbria, Northumberland, Tyne and Wear NHS Foundation Trust, or CNTW?
Yes, I've been a consultant nurse since 2019 and became a responsible clinician in 2023. But since November 2023, I've been a consultant nurse with responsive clinician duties on a male acute ward in Cumbria.
And just staying with the male acute ward, what would your role be there, please?
I am the responsible clinician for 10 patients. It's an 18-bedded ward, and I'm consultant nurse for the 18 patients, so I am responsible for the care and treatment of the patients assigned to my care. And that is also, I have statutory obligations due to the Mental Health Act for those patients.
If you pause there, I'm going to break that down and come back and ask you about individual parts of it. First of all, how long have you been a consultant nurse? Did you say from 2019?
Yeah, 2019.
And what is a consultant nurse?
A consultant nurse is a high-level nurse. The role came about 26 years ago, and it was developed to encourage nurses, highly experienced nurses, to remain in clinical practice and not just to go into operational roles. So it was encouraged to keep skilled and experienced nurses in face-to-face practice. The role incorporates 4 elements such as clinical practice, research and development, leadership, and education and training. Some consultant nurses have a balance of more clinical work than research, and some are more researchers than clinical, but ultimately we work within the 4 pillars of those nursing.
So we've also heard that you are a responsible clinician, approved clinician, and you've touched on that already, but I just want to come back to that, please. What is that sometimes abbreviated to RCAC?
It is.
Can we just
Yeah.
use that if we need
Yeah.
to?
Yeah.
What does an RCAC do?
An AC is approved by the Secretary of State to act in accordance with the Mental Health Act. The RC is the role by your employer to act in such a manner. So the AC is the training, the approval to do it, and the RC is the role in which you're in.
So the approved clinician, as you said, approved by the Secretary of State, and is that to make certain decisions, as you say, under the Mental Health
Yeah,
Act?
within the Mental Health Act, yeah.
Can we deal with certain other qualifications, please?
Yeah.
Did you obtain a diploma in mental health nursing in 2006? And are the following amongst the qualifications you received subsequent to that? So a BSc in practice development in nursing in 2014,
Yeah, that's correct.
and postgraduate certificates in clinical leadership in 2020,
Yes,
and mental health law in 2022.
yes.
What did you study or cover for the mental health law postgraduate certificate?
I completed the postgraduate in mental health law in preparation for becoming an approved clinician. So the course covered the Human Rights Act, Mental Capacity Act, and the Mental Health Act.
So human rights principles and
Yes.
the Human Rights Act 1998 specifically were amongst the areas that you studied.
It was, yes.
What further experience do you have of the application of human rights concepts in the context of mental health and mental health inpatients?
It's incorporated into my daily practice, maintaining the rights of individuals. It's working in accordance with the law. Majority of my patients are detained under the Mental Health Act, but that doesn't mean that we don't take into consideration their rights. And so it's a very it's a responsible role that takes great consideration that you're always doing the right thing at the right time.
What experience do you have in relation to mental health tribunals specifically?
Quite frequent. It's part of my weekly work. Patients that are in my care have the right to appeal the decision to be detained under the Mental Health Act, and in preparation for that have to write reports and attend tribunals, usually on a weekly basis.
Thank you. Do you also have a level 7 qualification in non-medical prescribing?
I do, yes. I'm a non-medical prescriber.
What's the non-medical element?
I'm just not a doctor, medical doctor.
So to lay people, you're able to prescribe, it's
I'm
just
able
that you're
to
not
prescribe.
a doctor.
Yes.
Thank you. Could we look at briefly at some of the previous roles that you have performed? I'm going to ask that part of your report is put up, please. I'm going to give the reference of your report once. It's INQY 025967, but I'll just refer to it as the report. Would you put up, please, page 102 and expand from employment history to the bottom of the page? Thank you. Just starting with the top of the list there, this is the role I think that you have told us about from November 2023 to current within the trust that we've just discussed, and the RCAC consultant nurse role. And I think you've already explained it's an adult acute 18-bed inpatient ward, yes?
That's correct.
And can we see there underneath it the role that you performed before? From September 21 to November 23 in the same trust as a consultant nurse. So that was crisis resolution home treatment team. And then if we drop down to number 4, between 2019 and 21 in the same trust as consultant nurse, would you go over to the top of the next page, please? And we could see that was on a mixed-sex 22-bed adult acute inpatient psychiatric intensive care ward. ward. And then we see work as a service manager between 2016 and 2019, work as a ward manager, team lead, clinical lead, and staff nurse before that. Those are all at the Cumbria Partnership NHS Foundation Trust. What is the relationship, if any, between that trust and the trust that you currently work for?
In October 2019, the North Cumbria Mental Health and Learning Disability Services merged with Newcastle Tyne and Wear Mental Health and Learning Disability Services, and South Cumbria merged with Lancashire Care Trust.
So it's a development into that, to the current trust?
Cumbrian Partnership Trust was not solely a mental health and learning disability trust, it also incorporated district nursing, community hospitals, so it allowed Cumbria to be part of a bigger mental health and learning disability focused trust.
Thank you very much. Would you take that down, please? Now, amongst the other facets to your career that are set out in the report, have you on 2 occasions acted as an expert advisor to the Health Services Safety Investigations Body, or HSIB?
I have, yes.
And did that include, in 2024, working on the investigation examining the use of enhanced observation levels for patients who self-harm on inpatient wards?
I did, yes.
And since 2014, have you been a lead peer reviewer for the Royal College of Psychiatrists Accreditation for Inpatient Mental Health Services, or AIMS programme?
I have been, yes.
You're here today to provide expert evidence to the inquiry on observation and engagement practices, the use of vision-based technology, such as CCTV and body-worn cameras, and vision-based patient monitoring systems. Now, we have been using the acronym VBPMS, which is a bit of a mouthful, but we do understand what that means thanks to the evidence we've heard recently. Is this all in the context of mental health inpatient care?
It is.
First, can I ask you how you're familiar with the use of CCTV and body-worn cameras? And for those following, this is paragraph 1.9 at page 4.
So in my previous role as service manager, CCTV was beginning to be implemented into the wards that I worked. So CCTV was implemented first, if I recall, and then followed by body-worn cameras. But round about that time, I wasn't directly involved in the governance of the implementation. So I was part of the early talks about introducing it onto acute wards.
And how are you familiar with VBPMS? And this is paragraph 1.10.
From a professional, I had a professional interest in it, and I was aware of the technology from my time on a PICU, which is the psychiatric intensive care ward. So that was round about 2019-20 that I was aware of the technology, but I didn't actively, I didn't work on a ward till 2023 when it was implemented. It had just been implemented round about the time that I started working on the ward, and that was when my first experience of working with the technology.
So are you familiar with the system in practice?
I am, yes.
Thank you. You provide a summary of your instructions at section 2 of your report. Can we deal briefly with them now, please, before we move on to address your first topic? You say this at paragraph 2.2, and that's page 6, that this report will discuss observation and engagement practices and the use of VBPMS and VBT, vision-based technology, within mental health inpatient settings. It will benchmark practice against relevant national standards, legislation and guidance, and will identify what good practice looks like during the relevant period. It will also consider the challenges faced in mental health inpatient care in England during the relevant period, as well as current practice. And does the report indeed cover those matters?
Yes.
And you've provided, as I've said, a detailed summary of your instructions in section 2, and I don't intend to take you through that now. Has the inquiry provided you with a large amount of evidence and information to review for the purposes of providing your report?
It has.
Does that include witness statements, exhibits and transcripts of evidence from sources such as Leo or OxyHealth, and Essex Partnership University NHS Foundation Trust, or EPUT?
It has.
Can just deal with what we should call OxyHealth. We understand that the company OxyHealth has rebranded and is currently known as Leo. But we have, during the course of this inquiry, been referring to OxyHealth as the name of the company. What I suggest, just for the sake of simplicity, is that we continue to do so if we need to refer to the company today. Mm-hmm. And we have been referring to the technology as OxyVision. Could we continue to do that again for the sake of simplicity today, so that we all know what we're talking about? Yes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you also been provided with a statement and material provided by the organisation Stop OxyVision?
I have.
And have you been provided with case summaries and further material, including witness statements from bereaved family members concerning the 14 tragic deaths that you've considered for the purposes of the report?
I have.
So you refer in the report to 14 deceased individuals, and you do so in the context specifically of your instructions. So that's observations, engagement, technology. And do you take aspects of their experience to then discuss points that you're able to make falling within your instructions?
I have, yes.
And within the report, do you refer to the following people? Adam Steele, Bethany Lilly, Diana Hammond, Edwige Insilu, Elise Sebastian, Gareth Clark, Jason Standing, Johnson Omotoyimbo, Kelly Campbell, Madison Naylor, Michael Nolan, Morgan Rose Hart, Sophie Alderman, and Stephen Neville. Do you refer to all of them in your report?
I do.
What information did you consider in relation to those deaths, please?
I considered the case summaries supplied by the inquiry, the family statements and the investigation from EPUT and the coroner's information.
So one of the questions I have is, just for absolute clarity, is this: did you read the family statements prepared by the bereaved families, or have you relied solely on the case summaries?
I read the family statements.
Could we move then to our first topic? This is observations and engagement, and it's section 3 of your report. Can I start by asking you what observations are in this context, please?
Yes, observations is a formal approach to how often somebody should be observed. So there's lots of observations in a patient's daily life on a ward, but this is a more formal approach, an identified level of what's required based on risk and need. And
is it an intervention of varying intensity?
The observation is an observation. That's the observation level will determine the frequency of when somebody should be observed, and then it's the engagement that details the more intervention.
Thank you. That then does bring us on to the question of what engagement is.
Engagement is the prescribed need of engagement to help that patient. There's an identified risk that, that a patient is identified as a risk that requires increased observation levels. So the engagement is what interventions are going to be done on the frequency of those observations.
So you say at paragraph 3.2, at page 12, that engagement refers to the therapeutic interaction that supports assessment and care. Would that be correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Why are observations and engagement considered together?
Because the observation just tells us where somebody was at what time. The engagement tells us how somebody is, which then informs treatment and recovery.
So they're both essential elements?
They're both essential, yeah.
Is it the case that an engagement very much depends on the nature of risk and the presentation? So just to suggest that turning up and talking to somebody or observing that they are breathing fit and well is too simple. You have to moderate engagement to the circumstances of the patient.
Yes, so example, if somebody's not eating or drinking, the engagement is to support with the eating and drinking. If somebody's highly distressed, the engagement is to offer comfort and support. So it should be tailored specifically to each patient.
Thank you.
You say this towards at paragraph 18.1, this is page 62 of your report. Observation and engagement practice exists for an important purpose: to preserve life, reduce harm, provide reassurance, and support therapeutic recovery during periods of significant distress and vulnerability. When delivered well, observations can save lives. And is that something that you've seen in your own practice and experience?
Yes. Yeah.
Could you put up EPUT 020729 at page 4, please, and expand the top of the page to include 1.1? So this is from the 2023 Therapeutic Engagement and Supportive Observation Policy of EPUT. And as you know, EPUT has been a focus of the inquiry's work. I just want to ask you about a couple of things here, please. First of all, can we see at 1.1, the first sentence or two, therapeutic engagement and supportive observation is an intervention by which staff engage with a patient to develop a therapeutic relationship, offer therapeutic intervention, and to reduce risk to the patient and others on the ward. So the reference there is to therapeutic engagement. How is that different from simple engagement?
It should have purpose and meaning, and it should be meaningful to the patient.
There's also reference there to supportive observation. How is that different from simple observation?
Supportive observation, again, should be meaningful to that patient, and it should be viewed by the patient as supportive, helpful.
Do you agree, in general terms, with the description here of the therapeutic engagement and supportive observation? Do you agree with what is set there as an intention?
Yes.
Can we just see the next sentence says that it's imperative that this policy has patients and their loved ones' experiences at the heart of it. That would follow, I think, from what you've just been saying, yes?
Yes.
And just dropping down a little bit, just over halfway, therapeutic engagement and supportive observation should be used to support care and treatment and not purely to avoid risk. It is an opportunity to build therapeutic relationships and maximize the opportunity for therapeutic support. It should be goal-directed and seen as an integral part of the inpatient care plan. And then at the bottom, individualized care plans, mindful of patient and carer preferences, are central to providing considerate care at a time of increased need and vulnerability, and in order to promote dignity. Just breaking that down, it suggests that the engagement and observation should be used to support care and treatment and not purely to avoid risk. What's your view about that?
Yes, sir, I would agree with this statement.
Has the approach to observations changed over the time being considered by this inquiry, from the beginning of 2000 to the end of 2023, and indeed beyond, up to present time?
Yes, in clinical practice, it has evolved quite a bit. I think it was initially more about the observation, keeping an eye on somebody, checking where they are. But as we've learnt more, such about trauma-informed care and managing risk and what is helpful to a patient, it's become much more of an engagement tool. So just to point out, every patient on a ward should be engaged, regardless. There should be an engagement plan. But for some patients, they do need a more prescribed, more frequent engagement plan because their need at that time requires that. So over the 23, 24 years, we've become much more patient-centred and more mindful of the impact that those observations have. And that's why there should be time limited, because they also come with, it can be intrusive in somebody's care. So that's why it should be really focused, it should be time framed, it should be reviewed, and it should be meaningful.
And so just to pick up on what you said, towards the start of the period that we're considering, the approach would have been quite different, potentially, with much more of a focus on the observation side. And as I've understood your evidence, as we go on through the period of time, the engagement element becomes more important.
Yeah, there used to be a general feeling amongst nurses that intermittent level 2 observations didn't save lives because it gave a window of opportunity. But as we've learnt more and evolved in our practice, we do recognise that actually it can save lives, and you learn from that patient being able to maintain their own safety for those 15 minutes is really telling. That's a big deal for somebody who struggles to maintain their safety. So if they're able to maintain safety for 15 minutes, you build on it to then they can maintain the safety for 30 minutes, and then you build and build. There's a saying, take every step, take every day. We say take every 15 minutes. So we've now realised the level 2 can be really helpful.
We'll come on to level 2 in just a moment.
Yeah.
Could you take that down, please? You refer in the report, this is paragraph 3.3 at page 12, to work by Len Bowers and others into suicide and self-harm in inpatient psychiatric units, a national survey of observation policies from 2000. So that's right at the start of the period that we're interested in this inquiry. I'd like to look at part of that, please. Could you put up online source 1 at page 7, please? And could you expand the paragraph on the left-hand column above conclusions? Perfect. So this is what that says. Lastly, it should not be forgotten that good relationships with and knowledge of patients are the foundations of patient safety. The establishment of such relationships is the heart of psychiatric nursing acute inpatient work, for which psychiatric nurses are specifically trained. Such relationships promote a strong therapeutic alliance to which the patient can become committed and facilitate the sharing of suicidal thoughts and impulses linked to a competent, systematic, research-based risk assessment They enable the proper identification of those patients who require CO. Now, I think that's a reference to constant observation in the first place. What is constant observation?
That is where you've got somebody with you at all times.
Does it equate to what we'll talk about in a moment, levels 3 and 4?
It does.
So does this bring up, right at the start of the period we're looking at, a point that you've already made more than once, the importance of good relationships and therapeutic care?
It does, yeah.
So this is referring to constant observation, but what I was wondering was whether the same points here would apply to lower levels of observation too.
Yes, it would.
Could you take that down, please? What I want to do just is, even at this very early stage, is just to ask you something that I may ask you again as we go along. And it's a point that is made at different stages in your report, and it's this. Is one of your observations that there can sometimes be a gap between, on the one hand, policy and expectations? For example, we've just been looking at an EPIRT policy, and on the other, what is actually happening on the ward? Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
For example, you say this at paragraph 18.11, that's page 64, for people who are following. The ability to consistently deliver observations to the desired standard is increasingly challenged by growing clinical demand, staffing pressures, workforce shortages, high patient acuity, and reliance on temporary staff unfamiliar with the ward environment or patient group. And we'll come back and I'll ask you about aspects of that. Mm-hmm. What I'd like to do now, though, please, is to move on to legislation, national policies, standards and guidance. And this is section 4 of your report. And what I want to do is to stay with the Len Bowers paper from 2000 that we were just looking at. Could you put up online source 1, please, at page 1, and expand just under the title, please? So do we see here, there's little empirical literature on observation as a psychiatric nursing procedure to prevent patients from harming themselves or others. National guidelines for this practice do not exist, with a consequence that local policies might be variable in content and quality. Now that makes a point that you make in your report at paragraph 4.1, where you say that prior to 2000, there was little guidance for observations practices in mental health inpatient settings. What happened locally instead?
There was policies back in 2000s. The trusts had policies, and it was implemented onto the ward. But you might see variations on different wards, even within the same trust. So it'd be very much led by the ward manager and what the practice would be. So you might see wards who have more high observation levels compared to others. It would also vary on some wards. Because we're talking back in 2000, the environments probably weren't as safe as what they are now as well. So depending on the environment, that might also inform if somebody's on higher observations. And back in 2000, we had an open door. I didn't work on a locked door till about 2014. It was traditionally acute wards were open doors, so the practice was completely different, but it was very much, before then, you were very much led by your senior leaders on the actual practice.
So you've talked about the possibility of a variation even between wards in the same trust. Would there also be variations between different trusts and providers?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Could you take that down, please? In the report, you chart the relevant legislation, policies, national policies, standards and guidance as they came into existence. you do that in some detail. I'm not going to ask you about everything in that section of your report, but I will ask you about aspects of it, please. So do the relevant legislation, policies, etc., include the 2005 National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, or NICE guidance, on restrictive practices, observations, de-escalation and management of violence in mental health settings? So you address this just for those following at paragraph 4.2. You also explain that that 2005 guidance was updated in 2015. You refer to this as the major influence in driving policy and practice and remains relevant to this day. Would you just explain what you meant by that, please?
I think the NICE guidance was the closest thing that we had to guide us in our practice. We had work, there was research, there was papers written, but this was, we hold NICE to the pinnacle of our guidance for care and treatment of patients. So when it was developed in 2005, that was our starting point really for guiding us, and then later updated in 2015, but it was influenced by recognising observations and engagement as a restrictive practice and seeing it more in that concept, which I don't think we considered it before.
We'll pick up on that point of observations being considered as restrictive later on. Was another of the important developments the Mental Health Code of Practice from 2015?
The Code of Practice 2015 also highlighted about restrictive practices in line with the Mental Health Act, but we took it for all patients on all wards. So again, it just made us more informed and more aware of how we practice and the impact it has.
Does the Code of Practice provide statutory guidance to registered medical practitioners, approved clinicians and others on how they should carry out functions under the Mental Health Act in practice?
It does.
You say this at paragraph 4.4. Through the principles of least restrictive measures, maintaining dignity and respect, being person-centred, carer involvement and being trauma-informed and necessary, that's how it influenced inpatient observations. Is that correct?
It is.
Can we look at a part of it, please? Would you put up online source 2, please? This is the Code of Practice dealing with enhanced observation, which we'll come on to. So would you put up, yes, online source 2 at page 287. So do we see here, thank you for that, do we see here, provider policies should cover the use of enhanced observation and include, and we see some bullet points, including the last one there, how observation can be carried out in a way that respects the individual's privacy as far as practicable and minimises any distress. In particular, provider policies should outline how an individual's dignity can be maximised without compromising safety when individuals are in a state of undress, such as when using the toilet, bathing, showering, dressing, etc. And can we see in the next paragraph, staff should balance the potentially distressing effect on the individual of increased levels of observation, particularly if these are proposed for many hours or days, against the identified risk of self-injury or behavioural disturbance. Levels of observation and risk should be regularly reviewed and a record made of decisions agreed in relation to increasing or decreasing the observation. First of all, dealing with the points about respecting privacy, minimising distress and maintaining dignity. Why is that important in the context of an inpatient setting?
All those aspects could be re-triggering a trauma and delay somebody's recovery. And so it is a balance, and we do have techniques and skills that we can balance maintaining privacy and dignity, but also maintaining the patient's welfare and safety at the same time. But it's crucially important that those factors are taken into consideration. And also, we do know just from my own practice that when patients are on high observation levels, they tend to neglect personal care because of the privacy and dignity element. So, and that is not that's not what we're aiming to achieve. So it's getting a fine balance. But it's really we work with patients at the worst time of their lives. So we certainly don't want to cause any more harm.
Thank you. Will you take that down, please? You refer also to the Culture of Care programme from 2024. Were the Culture of Care standards produced by NHS England?
Yes, there was in partnership with other, I believe that the Royal College of Psychiatry, there was, it was a very collaborative approach, and it was identifying not just standards but the culture on inpatient wards, and it was very much person-centred, family carer led.
You address a paragraph 4.9, which is page 15, more about the standards themselves. But could you give us the key points arising from them for the purposes of the areas that we've asked you to cover?
The Cultures of Care programme was a really good programme in letting us see it from the other side, letting us see it from family and patient experiences, and getting us reinforcing. We knew it, but it didn't always translate into practice. So it helped. The Cultures of Care programme offered coaching for inpatient wards to improve their practices and improve the way they interact with patients and families, and also looking at the environment to make it more therapeutic and caring, because the environments themselves, you've got lots of standards to achieve, but they don't always so I think if you think of fire regulation, so you've got to have heavy doors, you've got to, and in infection control, everything's got to be clinical, you can't have soft furnishings, but then you've got equally the voice of the patients and the carers and even the staff that the environment's not therapeutic. So you're balancing a lot of expectations on a ward, and the Culture of Care sort of help bring together those conflicting demands that we might have. That environment must be safe, but equally it must be therapeutic at the same time.
And you say in the report that it also highlights the importance of understanding the reasons behind a patient's distress and behaviour.
Yeah.
And the importance of involving patients and families in care planning. Is that right?
Yes.
Does the guidance also recognise that ward culture, staffing pressures, leadership, training and workforce well-being all influence the quality and effectiveness of observation and engagement practice?
It did, yeah.
Then the last of the developments that I want to ask you about is another NHS England document, I think, ETOC from 2024. Can you explain what ETOC stands for and what it is, please?
It's Enhanced Therapeutic Observation and Care.
What does enhanced mean here? Is that levels 2 and above?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And what was the importance or significance of ETOC, which you cover for those following from paragraph 4.10 onwards?
I think the importance of it was the first major dedicated guidance or programme on observations and engagement practice. Although it had been touched on from restrictive practices, this was the first time that observations and engagement was defined in its own meaning. It gave clear expected guidance and support to what individual trust should work on, and how it can achieve better outcomes.
Thank you very much. Chair, I'm about to move on to a new area. May I suggest, we've been going for just a little under an hour, may I suggest that we break now until 11:10?
11:10.
Thank you. Chair, just may I pick up on something I said by way of introduction this morning, and indeed we say every morning. We understand that the evidence that's being given at these hearings can be very difficult to listen to, and of course people should feel free to leave the hearing room if they feel they need to. We will just ask that they do not come back in until there is a pause so as not to disturb others, including the witness. So just wanted to reiterate that point. I said, Ms. Archibald, that I was going to move on to a new topic, and this is section 5 of your report on defined levels of observation and engagement. And we've already started to talk about different levels and enhanced levels, but can we now deal with that topic itself? Is it right that there's no single nationally mandated system defining the different levels of observation?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So is this another scenario where the approach is on a local level?
Yes.
So typically defined within local trust policies, for example?
It is, but to my knowledge, most trusts follow a similar principle, but like the definition of what level 4 is might vary.
So I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. I'm going to ask you first just to take us through the different levels, and then we'll look in terms of level 4 at EPUT's policy. You say in the report that although terminology and exact frameworks may vary between trusts, they have the same clear principles as per NICE 2015 and ETOC 2024 guidance. Does that pick up on what you've just been saying?
Yes.
And do you set out the different levels of observations and engagement in some detail in the report? What I want to do, please, is to look at the NICE guidelines, but in fact I'm going to take them as they're set out in the ETOC report, just for the sake of simplicity. I'm going to ask now that online source 3 is put up. This is the ETOC guidance at page 7. And can you expand from the top of the page to the bottom of the bullet points? So I'm just going to read this, please. We can see 4 levels of observation that should be used in inpatient psychiatric wards, including general adult wards, older adult wards, psychiatric intensive care units, and forensic wards. So I suppose the first question that arises from that is, are there particular types of ward or service where different approaches to observation are appropriate?
My understanding is that the observation levels remain the same on each of the ward. It's just some wards might use them more frequently than others.
So the general approach in terms of the levels that we're about to go through should be of wide application?
Yes.
Thank you. Can we start then in the first bullet point? Low-level intermittent observation, the baseline level of observation in a specified psychiatric setting. The frequency of observation is once every 30 to 60 minutes. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
So that's, in layman's terms, is that the entry level of observation and the only level that's not an enhanced level?
Yeah, that's a minimum level that most, if not all, patients will be placed on.
Do we then see high-level intermittent observation, usually used if a service user is at risk of becoming violent or aggressive, but does not represent an immediate risk? the frequency of observation is once every 15 to 30 minutes. Again, is that what some people refer to as level 1, as level 2?
It is, yeah.
Then do we move on to continuous observation? Now, we've already seen reference to this, usually used when a service user presents an immediate threat and needs to be kept within eyesight or at arm's length of a designated one-to-one staff member with immediate access to other members of staff if needed. Is that what is sometimes referred to as level 3?
It is.
And then level 4, multi-professional. Sorry, I've said level 4. I'll come back to ask you whether that's correct. The fourth bullet point, multi-professional continuous observation, usually used when a service user is at the highest risk of harming themselves or others and needs to be kept within eyesight of 2 or 3 staff members and at arm's length of at least 1 staff member. Now, does that equate to what is sometimes referred to as level 4?
In my practice, that is level 4.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can we deal then first with level 1, to the extent that we haven't covered it already? You say this at paragraph 5.3. The purpose is primarily to maintain awareness of each patient's location and general presentation, including for environmental safety purposes. Is that correct?
That is, yes.
Now, you've mentioned level 2 before the break, and now we can come back to look at it again. You say in the report that this approach is intended to reduce predictability and thereby minimise opportunities for self-harm, suicide attempts, absconding or other adverse incidents. Would you expand on that, please?
Yeah, so I would say in about the last maybe 8 years, so previously practice would be 10 minutes, 15 minutes or 30-minute intervals, and you would do it specifically on the 10 minutes, 15 minutes or 30 minutes.
What, so it's the same time every hour?
Every time, yeah. And then some evidence and some review of practice was been undertaken, and it was felt that the observations were becoming predictable in nature, and that if a patient was intending to cause themselves harm or cause other harm or abscond, they had a window of opportunity that they could act on. So we moved away from specific 10, 15, 20 or 30-minute checks to number of checks within the hour. So such as you'll be checked on 4 times the hour, and those 4 times could technically be checked on within the first 30 minutes, so there might be 30 minutes of not being checked on. I can see the advantage and disadvantage of both, and I believe there's place for both regular checks and ones where they're sporadic in the hour. So some patients will need that frequency of every 10 minutes, whether it's for eating and drinking or falls or physical health, where their risk profile might be predictable timings might place them at greater risk, then I could see that being more used in practice.
Just asking you about that last point. So in the later approach, more recent approach, is there a deliberate unpredictability to the times at which an observation will be made?
Sorry, could you just read
Yes,
that?
so you were talking about predictability or unpredictability.
Yeah.
Is the approach more recently to deliberately be unpredictable, so a
Yes.
patient won't know?
Yes.
It won't be 10 past the hour that someone will be turning up. They could turn up any time to conduct
Yes.
an observation.
Yes.
What's the purpose of that?
It's to I suppose it's to observe the patient in the most natural state, and also reduce the opportunity for them to come to some harm or be or cause harm. So it's sporadic in nature, and that's meant to, I suppose it's the risk management of it, the element of it.
You mention in the report that there's limited evidence that intermittent level 2 observation alone prevents serious self-harm or suicide, but that used as part of a wider therapeutic risk management plan, that there may be more effect. Is that correct?
Yes, those are observations and engagement as a standalone are only useful in the context of other treatment available.
Sticking with that point, I'd like to look at an NCISH publication with you, please. Does NCISH stand for the National Confidential Inquiry into Suicide and Homicide by People with Mental Illness?
It does.
NCISH.
Yeah.
Did they produce a report on inpatient suicide under observation in 2015?
They did.
Could you put up online source 4, please, at page 3, and expand the left-hand column from key findings? So this says, I'm not going to read all of it, but there were an average of 18 suicides by inpatients under observation per year in the UK over a 7-year study period. 91% of deaths under observation occurred under level 2 intermittent observation. Is that a surprising statistic?
No, it's not surprising. You've got to take into consideration as well the amount of patients who would have been on level 2 who didn't go on to complete the suicide. So, that does not surprise me.
Dropping down, we could see deaths under observation tended to occur when policies or procedures, including times between observations, were not followed. For example, when staff are distracted by other events on the ward, at busy periods, for example, 7 to 9 a.m., when there are staff shortages, when ward design impedes observation. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
And then it says half of deaths occurred when observation was carried out by less experienced staff or staff who were likely to be unfamiliar with the patient. For example, healthcare assistants or agency staff. Now, we'll come on a little bit in a little while to talk about temporary staff. Would you go, please, to the top of the next column? Thank you. Just the first 3 bullet points that we see there, please. Can we see, in fact, the second bullet point there? Patients have mixed views about observation, some describing the process as intrusive and some as protective. Does that pick up on a point that you've made about a balance that needs to be struck? On the one hand, about keeping people safe, but on the other, in understanding that this is a restrictive intervention and the privacy and other rights of the patient need to be considered as well.
It does.
And do we see staff often do not see the purpose of observing the patient or how it links to the overall plan of risk management? They view the decision to start or stop observation as influenced by staffing levels and resources. Is that something that you've been aware of?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, so that last bullet point that we can see on the page, I was just asking whether that's something that you had also been aware of. Staff often not seeing the purpose of observing the patient.
Yes, and I think that that is a concern, and I think it's because they don't understand why that patient, or understand the care plan, or read the care plan, or familiar with the patient's care. But the second part of the statement, in my experience, observations are not reduced based on staffing levels.
Thank you.
Or shouldn't be reduced based on staffing levels.
Have you seen evidence to indicate that level 2 observations are overused? And do you consider that this may have an impact on patient safety and outcomes if you do?
My experience is some patients are unnecessarily placed on level 2 observations, particularly at the point of admission. It generally tends to be that if it's the patient's first admission to hospital, the nurse in charge might just put in an extra intervention just to get to know the patient. And also, just from supervising nurses throughout my career, there's a practice, some nurses might be more inclined to implement level 2 observations and some might not. So it does vary, but yes, I have seen observation levels used unnecessarily.
Thank you. Would you take that down, please? Moving on to level 3, you refer to the purpose of this level as being to allow the staff member to provide an immediate intervention should risk behaviours arise. And we've seen what was said in the ETOC document. But could you expand on that point, please? This is paragraph 5.10 at page 18 for people who are following. So you say the purpose of level 3 to allow the staff member to provide an immediate intervention should risk behaviours arise.
Yeah. So this is where you need to be with the patient at all times, because they've got the highest level of need, and the risks associated with that need can be life-threatening. So it's absolutely paramount that you remain with them.
Can I ask you about the beginning of the period that we're interested in and the approach to this level of observation back then? You address it in your report at 5.11, where you talk about it not being uncommon to observe staff sitting outside bedroom doors or maintaining continuous visual supervision with limited therapeutic interaction. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You actually describe it as custodial in nature. Could you just explain what you meant by that?
It was very common in the early 2000s that you would just watch a patient. You would just follow them from room to room. You would just, and it give naively some level of assurance to the treating team that that patient can't harm themselves because they're under constant watch. It wasn't therapeutic for the patient. Some cases, there'd be times when it possibly was, but the practice would be you would be sat at the bedroom door, the patient would be in the bedroom, and more often than not the person doing the observations would be distracted by reading something or engaging with other staff members. So it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was practice based on evidence.
Thank
at
you.
That time.
Do we see over the period we're interested in, and indeed up until recent times, the same trend to a more therapeutic approach, even at level 3?
Yeah, it's around the same time that we started to become more aware of the engagement element of it and the purpose and the meaning behind it.
You suggest in the report that level 3 observations can have a negative impact on the patient. This is paragraph 5.12, particularly where privacy and dignity are affected. How would one try to address that?
It can be part of a patient's care plan that they could go in the toilet by themselves, even though they're on level 3 observations within eyesight. It might be identifying that they feel more comfortable going to the toilet with certain members of staff if it's felt that you would need to be in the room. We also have gadgets or technology where they can put headsets on to make noise whilst they're in the toilet to maintain their dignity. We can play music. Or we can stand on the other side of the door, and this is what should form part of the care plan, that in the event that somebody needs to use the toilet or on a morning, you would, if it was a male patient, you would prioritise that they have a male member of staff with them whilst they're getting dressed. So this is what the care plan should be. Some male patients will prefer female staff. That should be identified in the care plan.
Thank you. We'll come on possibly to touch on that.
Earlier in your evidence, you made reference to you having techniques to balance the need to undertake quite demanding observations and the distress that might cause to a patient, and you suggested that you could fine-tune the way you did things. Is that what you are referring? Is that an example of
Yes.
what you're referring
Yeah.
to? Yeah.
Another example would even be if a patient is not eating because they're intensely paranoid that the food has been poisoned. That intervention would be that that nurse eats the same food as that patient to demonstrate that it's safe to eat. So it would be certain parts of the day that a member of staff will be assigned to have breakfast with them, have lunch. And it's so specific to that patient that it's that individualised care planning and understanding that patient, and they're the skills that you would apply.
But can I just ask you this, and it's back to the recurrent theme. What you're describing what one would want to see, rather than what one will actually necessarily see on any ward at any given time?
That's what you should see.
That's what you should see.
Yes.
Thank you. Can we come on to level 4, please? The highest level of observation and engagement, which you describe as involving 2 members of staff allocated to a patient continuously. This level typically implemented in response to the highest levels of assessed risk. So the NICE guidelines that we saw up on our screen said that 2 or 3 staff members and at arm's length of at least 1 staff member. So can it involve more than 2 members?
It could. I've not experienced more than 2.
You say in the report there's been increasing recognition of the significant staffing, governance and therapeutic challenges associated with prolonged 2-to-1 observation. It was recognised that this level of observation is the most intrusive, restrictive, and is likely to be traumatic for the patient. So what kind of governance around this would you need? What kind of review within a ward would this level of observation require?
It would tend to have more senior oversight. So the Associate Director of Nursing or the Director of Nursing would have oversight. There would be independent panel reviews on a weekly basis, or more frequent if identified. And there would be a 24-hour review on measuring where we're at in trying to reduce those observations and make it less restrictive. So it has much more, it's a big deal. It's a big deal to do that. So it has, gets everybody's attention, and that you have to look at alternative strategies, possibly a change of environment, which could be a change of ward, maybe. You have to look at all eventualities. And when it's level 2, it's mainly, for an example, if a patient is frequently trying to leave the ward and it requires a nurse to place hands on to try and prevent them, that's where 2 might be more safe. Or if somebody is actively trying to harm themselves in the more serious of ways, again, it might require hands on from the nurse, and that's where. And also, it's rare, but a member of the nursing team might be at risk from the other patient, either through allegations or assault. So the 2 persons necessary, but they're rare.
So in terms of oversight and governance, it should be at all levels, as I understand it, but it becomes increasingly important the higher the level of observation there is. It
has more of an... we do get, even on level 3s where it's within eyesight, there's an independent review, but when it's level 2, that is really restrictive practice. So that's when you might start to see the HOPES model being implemented, and that's when an independent panel will come and review.
So you're talking about level 2 or level 4?
Level 4.
Level 4,
Yeah.
thank you. So I'd said that I wanted to look at the EPUT policy on level 4 with you. And I'm just going to tell you what it says. This is Therapeutic Engagement and Supportive Observation Policy of 2023. And it says this: level 4, continuous within arm's length. This means a nominated staff member will be allocated to observe the patient in close proximity within arm's length for patients who pose the highest level of risk or harm towards themselves or others. More than 1 nurse may be required to implement this level of observation safely, but it could be just a nominated staff member in relation to level 4. You've referred to 2, and I think the policy that we looked at before says, up to 3 even. Can I just ask you this in relation to the EPUT policy, a single person in relation to level 4, can that be safe?
Within arm's length, yes, it depends on what the patient is on the requiring the level 4 for. So it could be digesting placing stuff in the mouth, one member of staff might be able to safely manage that. If it isn't safely managed, then you might need two. But and also somebody at risk of falls, maybe one member of staff, and that's why you're in arm's length, so you're close by.
But so you mentioned the fact that we still have a scenario where the approach to levels of observation is on a local basis rather than a national basis. Would this be an example of a local policy doing something slightly different from, for example, your trust?
Yeah, I think the principle's the same. The categorising it is sometimes different.
Do you know of other trusts that would allow a single staff member to be appointed to a level 4 observation?
My level 4 of understanding is 2 people, but within arm's length, yes, I practice with 1 person within arm's length.
Thank you. Your report also covers policies and procedures with regard to specific scenarios, including seclusion and long-term segregation, or LTS. During periods of seclusion, or LTS, are patients generally maintained on high levels of observation?
Yes.
Why is that?
Level 3. Why is that?
Yes, why is that, please?
It's because they're considered the most in serious need and at risk.
Thank you very much. I want to move now to physical health. This is section 6. So this is physical health monitoring in the context of patients admitted to mental health wards. And you say this at paragraph 6.1. People with severe mental illness experience significantly poorer physical health outcomes than the general population and are at greater risk of premature mortality, with a report that people with severe mental illness die on average 15 to 20 years earlier than the general population. Is that correct?
Yes.
You add that observation practice must include active assessment of physical well-being, not simply confirmation of presence or location. I want to ask you about News 2, please. What is the National Early Warning Score, News? This is paragraph 6.2 for people following.
It is a tool that is used within the health service that you monitor all 6, which I've stated in 6.2, such as blood pressure, oxygen saturation, temperature, and then you input the scores, the findings, and it gives an overall score, and then it gives guidance of when you would escalate it or monitor it, and depending on frequency.
So there's 6. You've mentioned 3 of them. Are the other 3 respiration rate, pulse rate, and level of consciousness or new confusion?
Yes.
Are any one or more of those more important than the others?
I don't think so, but them alone, you can have patients who might score really low on the news, but the presentation just doesn't look right. So for the professional eye, you would maybe repeat the news. So yes, the news is there as a guide, but it shouldn't take away your professional judgment.
So it's part of the picture, but not the complete picture.
Yeah.
Thank you. You address in section 17 of your report nighttime and sleep. Is there any part of the day when it's more important that these News 2 or some of those measurements should be taken? For example, is it necessary to take them all at night?
No.
We've heard already of the benefits of sleep for patients with mental ill health. Is there a generally agreed approach to nighttime observations and the nature or quality of the checks that need to be made?
You try and do, I think that's where we would accept that engagement reduces, depending on if the patient is awake or asleep or trying to get to sleep, and where it becomes observations, and we're just checking on their welfare, making sure that they're safe and they're well, but you try to do it in the least struggling to find my word, disruptive way.
How do you strike the right balance between allowing a patient undisturbed sleep with all the benefit that that brings with it, and keeping a patient appropriately monitored and safe?
It's really challenging. The room should be designed that you should have a clear view from the window at the door of the bedroom. For patients where they're all, to mine, I work with single bedrooms with en suites, so there might be some bedrooms that offer better observations, and I think if those patients are a higher risk, I would be moving that patient's bedroom into a more visible compared to a patient who is considered at a lower risk. So you have to be dynamic, and you have to you maybe have the conversation with a patient, because you do get patients who say, I haven't slept all night, but the records will document slept since 10 o'clock. So you might say to a patient, if you hear us coming or you're hearing us through the visor, raise your hand so we know you're awake. And that might give us an incentive then to go into the room and see what's causing that patient to remain awake. But it is challenging, and also you've got the noise of other patients that might be noisy on the ward that may also disrupt sleep, and the doors are heavy, so you can't get in and out the doors. It's really challenging, and I don't think it's one that we've managed to tackle.
Thank you. You addressed dynamic and fluctuating observations in section 8 of the report. What is a dynamic observation?
In that it fluctuates within the day. It's recognising that some risks might be, somebody might be more at risk at meal times, less of a risk at other times of the day, and so that should influence how the observations are applied.
Let's just be clear, that's a fluctuating observation, is it?
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
What's a dynamic observation?
Dynamic.
As 8.1 for those.
Yeah, it's just responding to when something happens. It's been prepared that something might not go to plan at any given time, and you have to be prepared to increase observation levels at any given time, and you must have the resources to be able to do that.
You say in the report, dynamic observation plans enable care to be tailored to the individual's needs, promote least restrictive practice, and support recovery while maintaining safety. Is that right?
Yeah.
I want to ask you about Elise Sebastian. She was on the Longview ward at the St Albans Centre and tragically died on the 19th of April 2021 at the age of 16. You note that, and this is paragraph 8.3, when Elise was alone or experiencing periods of isolation, she was required to be placed on level 3 observations, but she could be managed on level 2 observations when participating in activities or group settings. Now, is that an example of a fluctuating observation plan?
It is, yeah.
The inquiry heard evidence from Elise's mother last week, Victoria Sebastian. I'd like to look now at part of the statement that she provided to the inquiry. Is this one of the statements that you've considered?
I have, yes.
Could you put up HJA 019679 at page 23 and expand paragraph 94 and the top? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. So this is what this says. Despite being on level 3 observations during isolation periods, which all staff were informed about during the shift handover, Elise was allowed to enter her bedroom alone. To date, none of the staff members present on the day Elise died has admitted to letting her through the door. You say in the report that the failure to provide Elise with a level 3 observations when she returned to her room resulted in her being able to cause herself harm, resulting in her death. Now, you make observations about Elise's case from paragraph 8.5 in the report, starting with asking why Elise was not placed on level 3 observations when she returned to her room, and suggesting it's difficult to determine. But you then set out several factors which may have contributed to the failure. Would you just take us through those, please?
Yeah. When somebody is on fluctuating observations, it's absolutely paramount that everybody knows that patient's risks, because there's the fluctuating observations helps patients have some independence and some relief from being on constant observation. So it's done with the right intention. But that, having said that, there must be systems in place for when the situation changes, such as Elise going back to her bedroom. When she was on level 2 observations, so when I've said there's not one single cause, misidentifying where she was when she was on level 2 as an observation is a root cause, one of the triggers of it. And then the person letting her in a room is also a trigger. It's everybody's responsibility to make sure she's safe on that ward. And if there was if I remember from the case, you weren't able to move around the ward without staff enabling you to let you in. So it sounded like the environment was able to monitor the movement of patients. So how she was able to go from a communal area to her own bedroom, and even let in without anybody thinking the observations need to be increased is a concern.
So just to be clear, this was a scenario where what should have happened under the fluctuating observation plan is that when she went from one area to her bedroom where she would be alone, there should have been an increase in the level of observation. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah.
But that didn't happen. There was no observation once she was in her room.
And that must have been really confusing for her if she was aware of a care plan and what should have happened, to be left alone in a bedroom.
You say this.
It's confusion.
At paragraph 8.7, the fact that the observation requirements were not implemented when Elise returned to her bedroom indicate deficiencies in communication during the shift, inadequate handover of risk information, competing clinical demands, staffing pressures, or a lack of familiarity with Elise's care requirements. Whilst it's not possible to identify a single causative factor from the evidence that you've seen, the information suggests that a combination of individual team and organisational factors contributed to the failure to provide the observation arrangements intended to keep Elise safe. Now, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No.
Could you take that down, please? Could we address observations levels when transferred to another ward or hospital? And this is section 10 of your report. What might the effect be on a patient's risk profile if they're moved from a mental health inpatient unit to an acute ward or hospital?
A completely different environment that isn't designed to meet their needs. So you have to take into consideration when a patient does get transferred from a mental health ward to an acute medical ward, what is that patient's individual risk and what would the impact of being in a different environment be? For some, it might have minimal impact for them. Others, it might be quite significant.
You say that it might significantly alter the patient's risk profile, is that right?
Yes, yeah. You've got to reassess because it's a different environment.
And you say that acute general hospital environments are not typically designed or risk assessed in the same way that mental health inpatient wards are.
Yeah.
Could we look at something that develops that point, please? Would you put up the HCIB investigation report? This is on line source 6, patients at risk of self-harm, continuous observation at page 19. Now, is this one of the reports that you were involved in?
Yes.
We see there 2 paragraphs. I just want to look at aspects of those. We see in the first, acute hospital environments, particularly intensive care and high dependency units, create additional risks for patients at risk of self-harm. The staff from both the acute hospital and MHS, which we understand is mental health hospital, told the investigation that risks arose from, for example, medical equipment, the ability to open windows, potential ligature points, and the availability of cutlery. Now, is that something that would all be familiar with you as risks when you move to a different environment?
Yes.
Do we then see towards the bottom of the second paragraph, in a new environment, the risks were likely to be different, potentially leading to different unpredictable behaviours? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Could you take that down? So would that mean that for someone moving from a mental health inpatient environment to an acute environment, that then there may need to be a reconsideration of their observation level?
Yes.
Can we look at the case of Bethany Lilly, please? Bethany's brothers, Alexander and Paul Gill, have provided a statement to the inquiry. Could you put up BHAT 010167 at page 56 and expand paragraph 1411? And we see 1411. Could that be expanded, please? Thank you. Just want to read this, please. We've been asked to comment on the level of observations in place when Beth was transferred from the Peterborough unit to the Thorpe ward in Basildon Hospital on the 15th of January, the day before her death. In essence, Beth was transferred without any handover, consultant-to-consultant discussion, or any member of staff accompanying her, so that receiving staff had no clinical history of Beth when she was transferred. The lack of proper handover meant that Beth went from being on level 3 one-to-one observations, being in line of sight at all times at Peterborough ward, to level 2 observations, 4 observations per hour, then purely on the basis there had been no adverse incidents in 24 hours, she was further downgraded to level 1 observations on the 16th of January, without any further risk assessment carried out by a consultant psychiatrist. Given the near misses and consistent attempts at self-harm in the weeks leading up to the 16th of January, with the last instance of self-harm being on the 14th of January, to have this done without input from a psychiatrist and preferably input from a team of people involved in her care, this was clearly inappropriate. So was Bethany, a mental health inpatient, transferred to an adult acute ward?
My memory from the case was that Bethany was a mental health inpatient and was transferred to accident and emergency for treatment. And while she was at accident and emergency, she was reallocated a different bed on a different mental health ward. So when she was medically fit, she returned to a different ward, is what I can recall.
But what we see here was on her arrival, her observation level was actually reduced and then reduced again. Yeah. Would it be common when someone is transferred to a new environment for observation levels to actually be reduced?
It would be surprising. The only time that you might see that is if a patient is transferred to your care who is you're more familiar with that patient than the previous ward. So if a patient might be transferred back to you because you know that patient particularly well, you've worked with them, you know them, you might feel after reviewing the patient that you might be able to take more of a dynamic risk, positive risk take. However, you would be heavily influenced on the previous decision to be put on high observation levels, and you'd be more inclined to wait for a period of time to make your own judgment rather than just basing your judgment on past experience of the patient, because there might be new changes. You might know the patient of old, but you won't be familiar with recent events.
So is it just taking an example of someone on level 3 observations moved to a different environment? Would the normal approach be to keep them on at least that level whilst some form of risk assessment in the new environment is taken?
That would make more sense, and good practice would be to review a period of time and allow for more follow-up conversations with the previous care team.
And is that for the reasons that we were just talking about, that the new environment may have new types of risk that didn't exist in the old environment?
There's so many factors that can influence a decision that sometimes you need time to be able to explore all those factors.
You say in the report that this case highlights the importance of robust handover arrangements. This is paragraph 10.5. Comprehensive risk assessment during ward transfers, and ensuring that any changes to observation levels are based on clinical need rather than assumptions, environmental factors, or changes in care setting alone. Is there, in your experience, a standard or optimum practice for how long a patient should be maintained on an observation level before they are reviewed, especially when transferring from another ward?
There's no specific length of time, but it has to be enough time so you get a longitudinal assessment, but not too long where it's unnecessary. So there's a balance of being satisfied with your new assessment, where combined with trying to be the least restrictive at the same time.
Thank you. Could you take that down, please? In section 11 of your report, you address legal framework and capacity to consent. For consent to be valid, must it be both voluntary and informed? And must the person consenting have the capacity to make the decision?
They should.
What does voluntary mean in this context?
Voluntary is that they agree to be there, they volunteer to be there, they're agreeing to their care and treatment.
Is there a further element to it that they shouldn't be influenced by pressure from medical staff, for example, or friends or family, or indeed anyone?
Yeah, no, they shouldn't be coerced into it.
What does informed mean in this context, please?
Informed.
Informed.
Informal.
Sorry, informed. So you've said consent must be voluntary and informed. We've dealt with voluntary. I just wanted to ask you about informed and what that means in this context.
They must understand what they're agreeing to, and they must be given all relevant information for them to make an informed choice.
When you say all relevant information, would that include both benefits and risks?
Yes.
What are the options where a voluntary patient refuses observations? You deal with this at paragraph 11.1. For those following, that's page 32.
If the presenting need and risk from a professional point of view indicates that a patient needs enhanced observation levels, you would have that conversation with them. You would give them the reasons why you think it was necessary. If they didn't agree, just for that element of their care, but they say they agree to remain as an informal patient on the ward, they're agreeing to the other aspects of the care plan, but they're not agreeing to the observations, then you would respect their views and you would try and work with them in an alternative, but maybe with the agreement that if things don't go to plan, that we could increase, or they would have to agree. We couldn't overrule it unless we use the Mental Capacity Act, which is then assuming that they lack the capacity, or we would have to use the Mental Health Act if we think it's absolutely necessary to prevent them. But really, they will be the last resorts.
So if I've understood you correctly, the general approach would be you need consent even just for observations, and you would work with the patient on that. But there may be scenarios, particularly serious ones potentially, where you'd have to consider your statutory powers in the case of a voluntary patient who refused observations. Is that in summary what you were saying?
Yes.
Can we deal with capacity? I think you just touched on it because we've just talked about the Mental Capacity Act. But what is capacity as a concept in this context?
It's the ability to understand, weigh up information, retain information, and communicate a decision on any element of anything. But we start from a standing point that we assume everybody's got capacity first,
So this is the Mental Capacity Act, Section 1, is it? Must a person be assumed to have capacity unless proven otherwise?
Yes.
And are there further important principles that are set out in the Mental Capacity Act that must influence the approach in relation to patients? Do they include a person is not to be treated as unable to make a decision unless all practicable steps to help him, they always use him in these acts, but we take that to mean a patient. A person is not to be treated as unable to make a decision unless all practicable steps to help him to do so have been taken without success.
Yes, you must, if a patient is struggling to communicate verbally, that doesn't mean that they can't communicate, so you would look at alternative ways that they might be able to communicate their wishes. And it's important to point out that people can have capacity but still be detained under the Mental Health Act. There's an assumption that everybody detained lacks capacity, and that's not my experience at all.
It's another of the principles that the Mental Capacity Act sets out, that a person is not to be treated as unable to make a decision just because they make an unwise decision. That is true, yeah. And does it also stipulate that a decision made under this Act for or on behalf of a person who lacks capacity must be made or done in his best interests? Yes. Now, we've heard actually quite a bit yesterday and during the course of the evidence about best interests decisions. So is that what this is referring to? A requirement that at the heart of any decision is the best interest of the patient?
Yes, if a patient lacks capacity.
If a patient lacks capacity.
Yeah.
And finally, in terms of the principles I want to ask you about, before a decision is made, does the Mental Capacity Act also say this, that before a decision is made, regard must be had to whether the purpose can be as effectively achieved in a way that is less restrictive of the person's rights and freedom of action? And again, we have heard over the course of the evidence reference to the least restrictive approach.
Yeah.
So do these requirements apply in the context of observation and engagement as in other areas?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Moving then to section 12 of your report, please, initiating care planning and reviewing observation levels. You say at 12.1 at page 34 that initial observation levels should be determined at the point of admission.
They should.
But may fluctuate throughout the duration of the admission. And I think we've already talked a little bit about that. Can we deal with what happens at the point of admission first, please? Mm-hmm. What should happen then? What is the thought process or the requirement when someone enters the ward in terms of observation and engagement?
The admitting nurse, or the nurse that tends to be the shift lead on a ward, will receive notification of a new admission coming in. There should be a verbal handover, and we should be able to access the most up-to-date risk assessment electronically. And what happens is the patient comes onto the ward. Predominantly it's out of hours, but if it's in hours, it might be the wider MDT. We'll meet with the patient individually. We don't meet as a big group. We ask that everybody meets with them individually. We already get a handover of what the risks are going to be before somebody comes in. It might be that there's often conversations might be, we think this patient's going to need level 3 within eyesight based on the information that we've got. We're prepared for that. The patient comes in and actually the way they're interacting with us, we think, oh, maybe we can do least restrictive and maybe go level 2, intermittent to begin with. And that's ultimately how it's determined, but it can change at any point, escalate up. However, on reduction, what we advise is that it always goes back to the MDT.
So in dealing with the time that a person enters the ward, the initial decision is based to a large extent on information that's being provided by the people.
Yeah, and what's information available. Yes. So there has been times when you get information and it would imply that the patient might be able to be placed on level 1 observations. When the patient attends, what the patient presents as and what's been handed over do not match.
So you wouldn't take as a given the information that you're provided with. That's your starting point.
Yeah, and the admitting team tend to be the crisis team or come from a mental health act assessment. They aren't experts in observation levels. It's not an area of their practice, so they often they can make a recommendation. Some do have inpatient experience, but ultimately the decision lies with the inpatient team.
You say at paragraph 12.6 of the report that the level of observation and its rationale must be clearly documented in the clinical records and should include current mental state, risk assessment, purpose, goal and agreed interventions, timescale of review, physical health concerns, patient, family and carer perspectives. Now, I just wanted to be clear about that. Is that what you're considering as soon as someone comes onto the ward, or is that part of the consideration once they've been on the ward for a while?
That's as soon as they come onto the ward. Those are what we're aiming to get a better understanding of. We've received the handover, we've got the information available, but we then review the risk. So
Yes.
there's somebody that has done the risk assessment prior to coming in. It's paramount wherever possible that we speak to families and carers, because it might be that that family member has had to be with that patient 24/7 for days because of the level of risk. So we would replicate that. That would inform that maybe that patient needs level 3 observation. So, or if they come from a supported, like community support placement, we need to speak to their support workers. So there's always information that gets missed in a verbal and written handover. So we need to do our own digging of information really to be informed.
So you explain in the report, and this is something we've heard elsewhere, that during the earliest part of the period we're looking at, so I think you say around 2000 to 2010, clinical records tended to be paper-based and not always immediately available. And then over time, you see more electronic records. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You've spoken about handover and what that might entail, but would those involved include, for example, the Mental Health Act assessment team, the crisis team, or the community mental health team? You also mentioned a verbal handover. What's the significance or importance of that, please?
That is crucial. You need to speak to the practitioner who's been familiar with the case before, and it's an opportunity to ask questions or clarify information that's written, because sometimes it can be misinformation. So you would want to know when was the last time the patient took the medication, have they got medication on them. That verbal handover, which still often takes place via the telephone. For a patient being admitted who has been detained under the Mental Health Act, you still want a practitioner, mental health practitioner from the crisis team or the community mental health team wherever possible. But equally, you then receive a handover from the approved mental health practitioner, the AMP, which is often a social worker who's delivering the section papers. So you would check those section papers and you would check that the information you've received and the clinical records that you've got. So it's lots of fact-checking.
You describe in the report the increased requirement over the period we're looking at and beyond for relevant information to be inputted into the record. And you suggest that that can at times be quite onerous on on a busy inpatient ward. Can I ask you this? To what extent, in reality on the ground, would a receiving team in an inpatient unit necessarily have the time to work through the electronic records before deciding on a level of observation?
It's very limited. They would prioritise because often admission follows a discharge with NHS bed pressures. There's vacant beds don't sit for very long, so that nurse might be processing a discharge and then get information that an admission is coming in. So they've got multiple demands, but they crucially prioritise speaking to the community practitioner to get a handover and briefly reviewing the records. If it's within hours, for example, in my practice and my colleagues, we would notify, and then we would also look. If there's limited information and we have not received a verbal handover, which is sometimes the case, a patient can turn up with ambulance crews, new admission, very limited information, you would err on the side of caution and place them on level 3 until you're able to gather information.
Thank you very much. Chair, may I suggest that we pause now and then we take a break for 10 minutes, which will take us to 12:25, and that we come back and do a little bit more before we break for lunch?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Ms Archibald, just picking up on a point arising from what we were discussing before the break. You've spoken about the process when a patient is admitted to the ward. What I wanted to ask you about arising from that was, how is the information that the admitting nurse receives then disseminated to others on the ward, for example, HCAs, who will actually be performing the observations?
You should bring together a huddle. So you would ask everybody available, who is available, to come into the office. You would give a handover of the name of the patient, why they're coming in, and what, or if they're all, well, we should be notified before they're coming in, why they're coming in, and the observations that are looking likely based on the information. The shift planner would already identify an admitting nurse and a healthcare assistant. So the healthcare assistant's job is to, when the patient comes onto the ward, to show them the bedroom, to check the belongings. So they'll already be assigned for about the first hour to do all those administrative duties, and you would let the on-call doctor know if it was out of hours.
So that's the process that should happen in terms of dissemination of information across the ward, or to at least to the relevant people who will be conducting the observations.
Yes.
I want to ask you about care planning. This is raised in your report from page 42 at paragraph 1230 for those who are following. What I want to do is look at this part of the report, please. Could you put up the report, paragraph 42, so page 42 at paragraph 1230. So do we see here, having a collaborated care plan in place can assist with measuring the effectiveness of the engagement. It can help avoid overly subjective decision-making as to when observation levels should be reduced. The plan should clearly outline, and then do you list a number of things that it should outline? Rationale. Sorry, you nodded there. I'm just going to ask you when you nod to say yes so the transcript can pick it up. Rationale, identified risks and positive factors, purpose, goals, agreed engagement, strategies, interventions, and any specific approaches required to support the patient safely and therapeutically, how staff should respond to distress, escalation, or changes in presentation, and agreed review timescales and criteria for reducing or increasing the observation level. In fact, you say, as we can see at the next paragraph, it's important that the patient not only is safe but feels safe. The observation can keep someone safe. The engagement can help someone feel safe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When should a care plan be formulated and put in place?
At the point of admission. So the first hour, the nurse should sit with the patient and, based on the risk assessment and the needs assessment, determine the level of observation levels, and then agree a collaborative approach with the service user on what would be the purpose and what's the goal, and that's when you should formulate the care plan.
So is that what makes what we have been referring to as a care plan, is that what makes it collaborative? Is that you're working with the patient or engaging with the
You're
patient?
agreeing with it, yeah. Everybody gets confused what a care plan is, but if we say somebody's plan of care, everybody's like, all right, that's the plan. But when we say care plan, we seem to think, it's a bit more confusing, but it's actually a plan of care for a patient. The care plan is a physical document that the patient has a copy of, families can have a copy of, that details the plan of care.
So you've talked about a collaborative care plan, and we have traced in other contexts a development over the time we're looking at, say from 2000 up to end of 23 and indeed beyond that, whereby there was a narrower approach generally in relation to observations to one in which we see a more therapeutic and collaborative approach in principle in any event. Now, for how long have collaborative care plans been the norm? Are they the norm?
They should be the norm. And care plans in general, so observation levels should be an aspect of their overall care plan altogether. There should be one care plan, and the interventions might be that they're on enhanced observation levels, and that's where it shouldn't be lots of different care plans for different things. It should be one, and specifically identifying what that person's observation level should be. Over time, we are encouraging and supporting more collaborative approach, and that there should be evidence that it has been collaborative by using the patient's language, getting the views of people who know them best. And when you're auditing a care plan, you should be looking for those, like the language used. Does it feel like the patient was involved in this care plan? Can you see the patient's voice in this care plan? That's what we mean by collaborative. You might not always agree on certain elements of the care plan, and that should be evidenced in the care plan as well. So when a patient might say, I'm agreeing for these observation levels for 24 hours only. So you would put, the intervention would be, the agreed timescale is 24 hours because patient A is not agreeing beyond that. So that's where you can see that it's a collaborative approach.
So how long has the collaborative approach been part of the process? So, for example, if we go back to the early years that we're interested in, from 2000 onwards, to what extent would care planning involve this collaborative element?
I would say more recently, in about the last 10 years, are we seeing a more active. There'll be services and there'll be practitioners who have always worked in a collaborative way, but I think it's more of it's always been the expected standard, but I don't think it's been given as much creed as it has been in the recent 10 years.
Can I come back then to a question I've asked you previously? So this is the expected standard,
Yes.
but does that expected standard differ sometimes to what in reality actually happens on a ward?
Yes.
Are there any general reasons for that?
Just not enough time, too many demands, too much expectations placed on the nurses to do the job. Nurses will ultimately focus on spending time with a patient and maybe paperwork second, but when things don't go to plan, it's the paperwork that is checked. So that really affects a nurse in the workplace, and that's what tends to leave people leaving the inpatient environment, because sometimes it can feel like an impossible task to meet the patient's needs but equally meet the trust expectations.
Thank you very much. Would you take that down, please? I'd like to move on to training. This is at section 13 of your report from page 43. Should staff assigned observations have specific training?
They should.
Could you confirm whether prior to the introduction of ETOC, so that's the Enhanced Therapeutic Observation and Care Programme we were talking about from 2024, there was any nationally mandated training package for observation and engagement?
Not to my knowledge.
Did that change with ETOC?
Yes, my understanding that some organisations had a training package prior to ETOC, but ETOC made it mandatory expectation that there would be one.
You describe in the report how training requirements were determined prior to ETOC. So, for example, at paragraph 13.1, where you say they were largely determined by individual trusts and providers, correct?
Yes.
What did that mean in terms of the consistency of training across the country?
The quality of the training varied. The trust, individual trusts might have different priorities based on findings from investigations, so there might be more focus on the paperwork of observations, where some might focus on the interactions with patients. It really varied depending on each individual organisational need.
What might training look like prior to 2024? You addressed this at 13.2. For example, you say it was common for staff to be inducted locally to the ward. Could you
That's
just
correct.
explain what that process might be?
Yes, so if a new member of staff started working on a ward, it wouldn't be uncommon that they would be given the observation and engagement policy, asked to read it, sign a declaration that they'd read the policy, then they would be classed as supernumerary, so not assigned any tasks for a period of time, whilst they shadowed another more experienced member of staff. And they would be guided through the process of what you do with observations, and then at a certain point they would be considered competent to do them independently.
So other than reading the policy, the training would really be on the job?
It would be, yes.
Coming back to ETOC, I'd like to look at one of the components of that programme, so from 2024. Could you put up online source 3 at page 7 and expand the section? That's it, thank you very much. So do you see here training, competencies and support? Why is this policy important? Enhanced observations are a clinical intervention. Clearly defined training competency requirements and staff wellbeing support ensure staff are equipped to deliver therapeutic, person-centred care. Standardising these expectations across the organisation promotes consistency and quality in ETOC delivery, ensuring all patients receive appropriate care. So does that capture, in essence, why training is important in the context of an inpatient ward?
It does, yes.
Can you take that down, please? You say in the report, this is paragraph 13.4, that ETOC guidance recommends trusts should develop a local training programme incorporating e-learning, face-to-face teaching, simulation, reflective learning, competency assessment, and supervised clinical practice. What is the significance, in your view, of the face-to-face teaching part of that?
I think the face-to-face and the simulation is crucial in ensuring that staff who are asked to do a task or an activity or an intervention know what they're doing. It's such a big part of inpatient care, observations and engagement. It's the major intervention that we do, but previously it's been given very little attention. And it can be really difficult to do good observations and engagement. So I just think that face-to-face teaching could offer people who aren't familiar with the process, that guidance, those opportunity for question and answers, to practice, to really prepare them as much as possible for stepping foot on an acute inpatient ward, any mental health ward, and give them the best skills that we can give them.
So we heard from you that prior to ETOC, a lot of the training is just on the job. When you say face-to-face training, do you have a particular type of scenario in mind?
Yeah, so there's some training. So there's e-learning, which you go on and you trust in the people who are doing the e-learning, that they do it, they're taking notice and they're not just guessing the questions, and you get so many attempts. So you're not really measuring somebody's active engagement in the process. It can be informative, but I think it's limited. And I think with certain training, it has to be face-to-face. I think it then shows how it's a really important intervention, and I think it should be treated as such.
When you say face-to-face training, might that just be following someone around a ward, or do you envisage some other form of face-to-face training?
No, more formal training, so a training day. It's where it's just designated, and I also, when you just train with another person, you miss the opportunity from other people's learning. So a group can contribute to the discussions. People might have more experiences of working in other services, and I just think it enriches somebody's learning.
Would you want to see those who are already on wards doing observations as a result of having had just on-the-job training? Would you want to see them now being trained?
I would like to see everybody on the inpatient wards being retrained.
Thank you.
For any level, even for doctors. And I just think it would be a valuable lesson for all of us.
Do you consider there is a need for a more comprehensive set of national training standards for staff conducting observations?
I think it should be mandated that it is face-to-face or in classroom learning. We do prevention, management and violence and aggression training as part, and that will be mirrored across all mental health and learning disability trusts. That's in the classroom. I would like to see that expanded to observations and engagement. We do immediate life support training in the classroom with simulation. Again, I would like to see that applied to observation and engagement.
Thank you. So we've started to talk about temporary staff. I just want to pick up on that now and ask you about an aspect of the case of Sophie Alderman. She was the daughter of Tammy Smith. Sophie was an inpatient at Willow Ward at the Rochford Hospital, and she died on the 19th of August 2022 at the age of 27. Can you put up part of Tammy Smith's statement, BIND 010161 at page 62? And would you expand from staffing to the bottom of the page? Thank you. So do we see here? I know that EPUT's evidence to Sophie's inquest was that the ward was fully staffed on the day of Sophie's death. But I believe they attempted to obscure rather than address the problem. Firstly, the supposed full staffing was only possible by recourse to a majority complement of bank and agency staff, and the ward manager acting down and effectively working in two roles simultaneously. Relying on bank and agency staff means that there are fewer people on a ward who know patients well, and who patients in turn know well. Who was Sophie going to be able to build a strong and trusting relationship with? So Tammy there refers to a majority of bank and agency staff here and the effects on Sophie. Can we move over the page, please, and highlight that? Thank you very much. So we see here, secondly, and perhaps more importantly, even if the staffing levels were technically up to standard, up to a standard EPIT were holding themselves to, that standard was obviously too low. Staff member after staff member gave evidence at Sophie's inquest that they did not have time to engage therapeutically with patients. And can we see at the bottom, how can it be considered by EPIT that there was enough staff on Willow Ward in all of those circumstances? You cover this from paragraph 14.17 at page 49 of the report, and you tell us that Sophie was at level 1 at the time of her death, correct?
Sorry, which page?
14.17 at page 49.
Ah. Yeah.
And I just asked you whether, as far as you're aware, Sophie was at level 1 observations at the time of her death.
Yes.
Now, you cover this in the same paragraph. How many members of staff were on duty on the ward and the makeup of those staff?
There was 10 members of staff on duty. 3 were regular or permanent members of staff to the ward.
And 7, that means 7 temporary staff?
That's correct.
And you also cover the observation levels of the other patients. Could you just deal with that, please?
Yeah, so there was 3 patients required level 3 or level 4, one of whom required 2-to-1 observations. This would have required a minimum of 4 staff members to maintain those observations. And then the investigation also identified that 5 patients were subject to level 2 observations, but I have not been provided with the information of how many staff were allocated to those level 2 observations. And then I'm assuming somebody was allocated to level 1 observations as well.
You refer in the report to the conflicting demands staff can face within inpatient ward environments, particularly where multiple patients require high levels of support, observation, or immediate response. That's paragraph 14.24. Does Sophie's case potentially demonstrate that issue?
Yes, I'm always cautious because I don't always think it's about staff in numbers. I think it's about the competency of the staff that you have and the skill mix. Yes, there's an essential number that you need, but if those 10 staff worked on that ward and knew those ward patients well, the care shouldn't have been impacted. The challenge is when you've got multiple patients on high observation levels, they tend to become the focus, and the patients who aren't on enhanced observation levels can, not always, but may be of secondly or not in not as given as much attention as what they should have.
Just dealing with the point about the prevalence of temporary staffing, please. You say this in the report, 15.1. Temporary staffing may impact continuity of therapeutic relationships and patient experience. That's potentially picking up a point that we saw in the statement, particularly within mental health inpatient settings where familiarity, consistency, and relational security are important components of care. Can you just explain why familiarity, consistency, and that type of thing are important in this kind of environment?
The key to mental health nursing is that interpersonal relationships that patients report. They are always keen to know who's going to be on shift, who's going to be their allocated worker, because they have a sense of security, known who's caring for them that day. When it's unfamiliar staff and the staff don't know them, they don't know the staff, that can increase somebody's anxiety and less likely for them to seek out help or make us aware that they're distressed. They might see the regular members of staff busy doing something, you often hear patients going, there's not enough staff on the ward, everybody's working really hard, so they don't want to interrupt people because they think, oh, well, that person's need looks greater than mine. And that's not what we want to hear. We want to be available to them at all times. So if they don't know the staff, they're less likely to approach them in times of distress.
You say also in the report that high use of temporary staff may introduce additional safety risks where staff are unfamiliar with local procedures, ward environments, electronic systems and patient needs. Is that right?
That's right. Sometimes temporary staff don't have access to electronic records, or if they did have access, they haven't worked a shift, so the time has lapsed, so they're logged out. They might not be familiar with where and to find things on the electronic records, and they might not be familiar with local ward procedures of if somebody wants to get something out of a cupboard, is it fine to get it out of the cupboard? And so it just puts extra pressure on the regular staff because they feel as though they're multitasking. And it also feels like you're having to take care of the unfamiliar staff to make sure they know where to go, what to do, and that adds extra pressure to an already pressured environment.
Thank you. Would you take that down, please? Can we now consider some more questions about staffing? This is covered in section 15 of the report. Has there been guidance over the period from 2000 to the end of 2023 about how NHS trusts and service providers respond to the need for additional staffing? So this is from paragraph 15.2 of the report on, for those who are following.
Yeah, so there has been evolving guidance. It looks at making sure that you've got the right staff, right skills, right place, and it also recognised, particularly the NHS England's mental health staffing framework, that staffing in mental health wards is very different from an acute medical. Often safe staffing levels always were based on medical hospitals, and it didn't take into consideration mental health needs.
I think what I'd like to do is actually look at part of that mental health staffing framework. Is that an NHS England document from 2015?
It is, yes.
Mental health staffing framework, a practical guide to staffing inpatient mental health services, correct?
That's correct.
Put up online source 7, please. And page 1. Expand the text at the bottom there, please. So do we see new framework for senior mental health professionals designed to ensure that the right people with the right skills are recruited into the right inpatient mental health settings? This is not intended to be rigid or prescriptive, but aims to provide support in seeking organisational assurance, how to complete a workforce analysis, and how you can make it work in your own environment. So this isn't mandatory, it's a framework intending to provide support, yes?
Yes.
Could you go over the page, please, and expand guide objectives on the right there? Just looking at this, to guide objectives, to equip leaders within mental health with the skills, knowledge and competencies to plan and deliver safe staffing. Assure all stakeholders that the skill mix and staffing numbers are appropriate for safe, compassionate care. Assure stakeholders that staffing numbers and skill mix are balanced with professional judgment and any other relevant factors, and to provide a means of assessing mental health services against agreed best practice. To what extent has this guidance or guidance of this sort been helpful or led to improvements in your view?
In my view, the guidance has given a more structure to an escalation process about staffing. What the challenge has been since 2015, the recruitment into inpatient has nosedived at the same time as this come out, so recruitment has become increasingly difficult. So there is an over-reliance on bank and agency. I think we're moving more away from agency, but we're still highly using flexible workforce, which aren't, you know, people who might have a contract, but they're not specifically to work on one ward. They move around the old wards. But the guidance was helpful, and it did give an escalation process, and it gave a senior overview of the staffing pressures on acute inpatient wards. When I was in an operational role, most of my job was staffing, addressing staffing needs, addressing staffing concerns. It really does dominate inpatient services.
You mentioned a moment ago the difference between staffing in the mental health context and otherwise.
Yes.
And you made the point that they're quite different. And I just want to look at something now that covers that point with you. Could you go to page 4 and expand the text there? Differences between mental health and other care settings. It's vital to recognise and take into consideration these important differences between mental health and other areas of care. And do we see there a number of bullet points setting out differences? So, for example, mental health services require a higher proportion of interventions. Interventions are often reactive and unplanned. Higher proportion of service users are ambulatory rather than bed-based. Length of stay in hospital tends to be longer for mental health service users. Higher percentage of service users are detained rather than there by choice. Around half service users require a higher degree of security. Would you agree that those are points which mark an important difference between the mental health context and the non-mental health context?
Yes, I would agree.
And do we see at the end of the text, all of these factors demonstrate the need for a purpose-designed framework for effective mental health staffing?
Yes.
So is there anything there that we see on the screen with which you would disagree?
No, I agree with it all.
Is there anything there that's of particular significance in your view?
No.
Would you take that down, please? You've provided, at section 18 of the report, your reflections on observations and engagement. And you say this at 18.12, which is page 65. Ultimately, observations are most effective when they remain human, relational, and patient-centred, rather than becoming purely procedural or surveillance-based. Would you just expand on that, please?
Observations can and do save lives, but it really does boil down to the quality of them and the relationship that you have with the patient. That patient is going to interact with lots of professionals in a day when they're in enhanced observations, and it actually doesn't matter that there might be not some staff that they don't like or get on particularly well, because you are not going to engage. It's not normal to have therapy for 18 hours a day. So as long as it is meaningful and there's certain elements in the day where they get to be with a professional that they do that work with, then it really can change lives, and also it really enhances the quality of our work, and it keeps mental health nurses doing what they do, because they go into mental health nursing to be with people, and so it can be a really important and meaningful intervention. I think it's become, but when it's become procedural or surveillance, that's when we've completely lost the meaning of it.
Thank you very much for that. We'll come back this afternoon and we'll move to a different area of the report where you discuss vision-based patient monitoring systems. So that's where we will turn to next. May I, Chair, ask that we have a 45-minute lunch today, which would mean starting again at 1:45.
Can I just ask one question?
Yes, of course.
I wanted to ask about staff undertaking observations. And we've heard about people suggesting that the quality of the observations, the engagement, can be compromised by staff fatigue, staff burnout, and long day rotas. Do you have a view on that?
Yes, so it seems across the board that they've gone to long day working, and that can be exhausting, working 14 hours a day, and sometimes they're working back-to-back shifts. And if you've got multiple patients on observations, that's where the fatigue may set in. But ultimately, I think if you are good at your job and care about what you do, you make it work. You engage that patient, and it can be a really meaningful intervention. So, sorry, I've lost the original question.
It was whether you thought observations and engagement can be compromised by staffing arrangements beyond just numbers, but rotas and time spent doing observations.
Yes, I think it has a major influence on the quality of the observations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.